Yeah, and our first question is we get all the time is I just started retirement. Which accounts do I pull my money from first? We have multiple buckets of money. We have our taxable, tax free, and tax deferred. Which one should I be pulling my money from first?
Yeah, so this is a question that comes up all the time. I'm at a party or something, or somebody's house, or a neighborhood party, and people come up to me and say, "Well, how much can I withdraw? What percentage?" I always get this, and sometimes they're trying to corner me, And so there is this 4% rule, right? That's been out there for quite a while, and so that's one rule of thumb. You can withdraw 4%. If you have $1 million, you can withdraw 40,000 a year, for example, something like that. You did some research on the 4% rule. Why don't you tell everybody kind of what you found about that, at least from a historical standpoint?
Yeah, and so the 4% rule kind of originated in 1994 from William Bengen, and he had this study where he essentially kind of backtested his data from 1926 to 1993, where he kind of took the historic returns and then he said, how much money could I withdraw without exhausting my portfolio of investments? And so he took a very simple allocation of 50% large cap stock and 50% intermediate treasury bonds. And so that was kind of the beginning of the 4% rule. That was kind of confirmed later by the Trinity study, which was a study from a group of professors at Trinity College. And then it's kind of been updated over time. And so William Bengen modified that allocation to be 35% large cap, 20% small cap, and then still that same 50% large intermediate bond. And then he found that you could have a 4.5% withdrawal rate based on that same historic data. And then we've also had late last year, we had Morningstar come out with, they believe only 3.3% is a safe withdrawal rate for 30 years. And so their data is kind of forward projecting. And then William Bengen came back and said, I don't believe that. And he kind of had a rebuttal. And so he had another kind of modified portfolio, which is 10% large, 10% small, 10% mid, 10% micro, and then 10% international, with 5% kind of treasury notes, and then 45% intermediate treasury bonds. And with that portfolio, you get a 4.7% withdrawal rate. And so these are kind of taking those worst case scenarios. How much can I withdraw over a 30-year period and still have money in the end and not run out of money?
Yeah, so this has actually become sort of a controversial subject in the last few years, whether the 4% rule really works and what have you. And so that's why it's really hard to answer that sometimes in a situation. We're going down the wrong path. So anyway, so that aspect of it is kind of fascinating, as to what you can really do in terms of withdrawal, as far as that goes. So I think really what we need to look at is sort of a better way to try to figure that out, right? Where we're looking at the scenario. The problem I have in these parties when people ask me this is just that really we end up with this situation where there's too many variables to really apply rules of thumb. Matter of fact, I would say in general, rules of thumb in the financial planning and asset management and retirement planning area very rarely actually apply to the people, because we're kind of all like thumbprints. We all have different scenarios. I think I've been involved in over 6,000 financial plans, and there are some commonalities, but they're all a little bit different from each other. So I really think the best way to figure it out is to use Monte Carlo simulation as a whole. So essentially, I'll show you an example here. And so optimally, what we're looking at is a scenario where we've got all of these inputs. How much Social Security do you have? How much pension do you have? How much does that pension grow? Do you have rental incomes? How much do those grow? Do you have how much in assets you have? How are those assets allocated? Because you can tell from that study that really the allocation, was different. It made for different withdrawal rates. What is your overall mixture? How much is in tax deferred versus taxable versus tax free? You name it. There's so many pieces. And what you're trying to do then is figure out, well, how much can I take out under that scenario? That's where Monte Carlo situation comes in. We can test and say, okay, well, what about this one? How many times does that work out of 1,000? So with this, for example, we push this little button here, and we end up with a situation. Oops, sorry. Go backwards. There we go. We push this button here, and we've got, this 1,000 runs through somebody's plan, and we're going to try to figure out, what, amount they can withdraw from the asset base as far as that goes. So really interesting. 85% is a pretty good number for this particular concept. So this one is at 96. We could test this out and figure out how much somebody could spend and still stay at 85%. And then, again, we look at it every 6 months. So that's a great way of taking a look at it and making sure that, it's still working as far as that goes. So I think that, in terms of figuring out, how much money you can spend, this is the key piece here, is really using Monte Carlo simulation.
Yeah, I still think there's a place for the 4% rule or whatever kind of percentage you want to think about. It's kind of the idea is I want a kind of a rough estimate of a figure that I want in the future. Say I'm in my 40s, I want to have kind of a, I want to start saving. How much should I be saving for my retirement at 65? And so it kind of gives you this rough way to estimate, and that's where this is kind of good. But the 4% rule when you get retirement could be very bad in a sense that is my retirement always going to be 30 years? And that's where this kind of study are fixated on 30 years. So it's like that 65 to 95 range. Yep. But if I retire at 55 and go to 95, that's 40 years. Does that 4% rule still work? Yep. Probably not.
Yep.
And also, you have to think about, is 4%, am I leaving money on the table? Mm-hmm. Am I taking out too little where I could be living a better way of life? Because the 4% rule is based on that worst case scenario. It's not based on like the middle ground or that best case scenario. So maybe I should be taking a little bit more money and I'm leaving money on that table.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think that early retirement thing is something we've been dealing with more and more. A lot of people are interested in that. If you apply a 4% rule to something, again, that was designed for 30 years. If you're planning on retiring at 45, what are you going to do after age 75? Theoretically, if it, brings your money down enough, that could be a problem. So again, the full financial planning concept using Monte Carlo simulation is a good way to do that. So altogether, kind of interesting. So we'll see how that plays out. But I actually answered a question here in an indirect manner. We were actually trying to figure out where to witdraw the money, and we ended up talking about, how much to withdraw, but still very fascinating piece altogether. It is part of the overall withdrawal strategy. But let's go back to the original question here, too, which I think is really interesting, and that is just simply, what is the, situation in terms of where you get the money from, because this comes up all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And so we've got these people, they're trying to figure out, okay, I'm now retired. Not everybody needs money, right? Yeah. So I have clients that just have enough pension, for example, or rental income, and really don't need to withdraw anything. But most people need to withdraw something. And so then they've got to figure out, okay, well, where do I get it from? I've got these assets. I got retirement plans, 401ks, IRAs, and I've got this, brokerage, taxable account set up in my trust. Maybe I have some Roth assets, right? But where do I start? Which one do I withdraw from first, second, and third? And, what are the ramifications? And actually, the ramifications are pretty dramatic. And this is something a lot of people don't really think about enough, in my opinion. So I got an example here that we can kind of use to show kind of how this particular withdrawal strategy would fit in. So, again, how much you take is another calculation altogether. Monte Carlo simulation is the way to do it. Where you take it, again, it's the same type of thing. You want to have all of your variables in there and figure out what's the optimal strategy for you. Okay, so if I share this, you'll basically see a big blob of orange there. That's the theoretically the amount of money somebody's taking out of their, tax deferred, 401k, IRAs, those type of things. The green is their Social Security, and the blue is how much they're taking out of their brokerage account or taxable account, their trust account, those types of things. And so really this particular piece of it is done what's called pro rata, right? So we're just doing this for an example, a baseline. And so pro rata would be if I needed $10,000 to withdraw, to live off of, and I had 10% in one area, account or taxable account, tax deferred, I'm going to take the money from 10% from there. Another 20% over here. I'm going to take 20% from there, and I'm just going to take a pro rata amount from each one of those to make up that $10,000. This is not the optimal strategy, but it is the baseline. You can see that the proposed strategy says $0 more there. Okay, so what we're going to do is show some different strategies and see how much it impacts that person's net worth. And we're trying to find that optimum strategy that makes their net worth grow over time, looking at taxes and looking at rates of return for those different accounts. So again, this is different for everybody, but for this particular case, you can see how dramatic it is. First of all, do one strategy that is really the wrong strategy in this particular case, and that's taking tax deferred first, taxable next, and tax free after that, right? And you can see the big orange piece is now expiring itself early, right? Because it's higher because you're taking everything out of the retirement plans first. This is actually one of the most common strategies we've run into, is that people will say, oh, I'm retired now. I've been saving for a long time into these retirement plans, like an IRA or 401k. So I'm going to take the money out of my retirement plans first, right? And then when I've expired those, I'll go to my trust account or my brokerage account. I'll start to take the money out of there, for example. So that's tax deferred first, taxable next. And so you can see, though, that versus pro rata, just taking an even amount out of each one, from based on how big it is, it's actually $888,000 less in net worth. That's
a lot.
That's a lot. And that's just from the strategy of where you're taking the money from, first, second, and third. So let's look at a different strategy, all right, in this case. And so there we go. We got a taxable first. So we're going to take a look at that brokerage account, that trust account, individual account, transfer on death. They all have a bunch of different names. But basically, it's a taxable account. Just means that when you make moves in it, you pay taxes on those moves potentially, right? If there's a dividend or interest paid that ends up in your tax return that year. And tax deferred, of course, would be those IRAs and 401ks. So if we start with the taxable, kind of run it down, and then go to the tax deferred, after that, it's $1.3 million more.
Yeah, that's a $2 million swing if you're going from the worst strategy to the best strategy.
Yeah. So think about that. That's $2 million more. And all you've done is identify the optimal sequence of withdrawals, where to take it from first, second, and third, and that optimal strategy for that, right? And so that's incredible to me.
Yeah, and you can also remember that you're not market dependent doing this. You're just being smart and tax planning properly. You're thinking about your taxes and where is the most tax efficient way to take your thing long term.
Yep.
And so if the market has an 8% return every year, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect you.
Yeah, exactly it. Because that's one of the things that happens for us all the time. People ask us questions, and it's hard to answer because of the market. We don't know where it's going. Nobody knows where it's going for sure. Long term, I feel good about it, but it's hard to tell. And so to have a strategy that doesn't rely upon that is really critical. And that is one of the things I like about tax planning strategy. Taxes do change. The rules do change.